Senate to the Honourable the House of Assembly. The Honourable the Senate has the honour to inform the Honourable the House of Assembly that at its sitting on Wednesday, 15 May 2024, the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2024 was amended in the following terms. In Clause 1, the short title was amended to reflect the insertion of the validation provision at Clause 15 and should now read, "This Act may be cited as the Income Tax Amendment and Validation Act 2024." And the Honourable the Senate transmits the amended bill to the Honourable the House of Assembly, inviting concurrence in the amendment to the bill, dated 15th day of May 2024, signed President.
Papers recommitted, sir.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm commanded to lead the Government of Barbados, acting through the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment as guarantor and African Export-Import Bank as lender, deed of guarantee.
Right. Government notice, sir.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of a resolution that the Honourable the House of Assembly concur in the amendment made by the Honourable the Senate to the Income Tax Amendment and Validation Bill 2024.
Revert to government business, sir.
Government Business is the order of the day.
Order number 12, sir. To resume debate on the passing of a resolution that the... Order number 11, sir. To resume debate on the passing of a resolution to adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee standing on social sector and the environment on the Child Protection Bill 2023 and the Child Justice Bill 2023.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise this morning to give my unreserved support to the bill before the Chamber and to thank the Honourable Member for St. Michael South and his team for continuing to set the standard to which we would want every Barbadian to be able to look up to and certainly, sir, to achieve. Now, the Honourable Member in his introduction to this bill, I think did an excellent job in articulating why we needed to move in the direction that we're moving in. And I know that for a number of members in his team, who I can see here this morning, have certainly been in, and you two are familiar, sir, in your previous association with them, that when it comes to this area, I can only say to those of you who have been in the trenches, so to speak, that I want to commend your effort, because in a lot of ways, this is really the side of ourselves that we don't want to see. And it is important to appreciate that through you, sir, that any effort that we can mount to protect children, all of us, sir, must be able to support, and to support the people who are out there every day, sir, every day, confronting the issues, and perhaps sometimes may not feel as if the rest of society is totally with you. And I want to say to you, do not be deterred by the detractors, because the work that you do is important to the development of this country. And so, sir, I will focus my remarks this morning just very quickly on a few areas because I think all of us will agree, or ought to agree, ought to agree, that the protection of children should be a normal thing. Should be a normal thing. But too often, it is not a normal thing. And there are some statistics that I know the Honourable Member shared in his presentation, Mr. Speaker, which I just want to reiterate and to make a much broader point in relation to the prevalence of abuse in this country, and to say, sir, that one is too much, far less the number of reported cases are too much, sir, and to the extent that we know that there are more than what is reported as a society, Mr. Speaker, we must wrestle this thing to the ground. And therefore, it starts with all of us in our family, sir, having open and honest conversation in our communities about what we're going to do to protect the future of this country. And I share with you, sir, that the total reported cases for 2021-22, sir, as reported here, there were 667 children impacted. 667, sir, in 2021-22. In 2022-23, sir, a total reported cases of 600 of cases affecting 672 children, sir. And as the Honourable Member indicated in his presentation, 657 between April 2023, sir, and 2024. And within those statistics, there are repeat instances of children being affected, sir. Now, sir, I stand here this morning in a reflective mood because I ask myself, sir, what manner of person, adult, seemingly responsible, whether family or otherwise, whether a person of responsibility within the institution, sir, what kind of people, sir, would repeatedly put our children, sir, through this type of abuse? And as you know, sir, the long-term impact of these things, sir, affect all of us, far less the individual who's actually experiencing this. And I know that sometimes the system, as we will call it, the system may appear as if it is not responding fast enough. And sir, as you know, this is something that each of us, we all have a responsibility, sir, to be able to wrestle, because as I said, one reported case is too much, far less the numbers that I just quoted here, sir. And those total over the 3 years, sir, if in fact, sir, they were all taken as distinct, is 1,996 cases, sir. And if you look across our school system, sir, if you look across our school system, that is at most 5%, sir, of our school population, notwithstanding that there are repeat offenses in there, sir. 5%, which means that when you look in every classroom, potentially, sir, there's at least one child, sir, in every classroom who may be subject to some type of physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, or abandonment, sir. In every classroom, somebody is affected in some way based on just those numbers presented there, sir. And I say to Barbadians, this cannot be right. This cannot be right. And as adults, we have a responsibility, sir, to get it right. To get it right. Now, sir, when I look in the numbers further, and as you know, sir, my son is autistic. He cannot speak. So when I look at the sexual abuse numbers over the same period, it totals 377 children over those 3 years, sir. Now, you know, sir, and I make reference to my son because we're talking about child protection. It is important, especially for those who cannot communicate, that the spaces within which they are invited to participate, it must be safe spaces. And therefore, whether it is the teachers, whether it is the sports, the person in the sports association, whether they're the persons within the religious community, sir, our children must be protected from any type of abuse, far less sexual abuse, sir. Must be protected. And to the extent that I, as a father, have to be worried, and my wife, sir, has to be worried about who is in the space, because my son can't come and tell me what happened today at school. He can't come and tell me what happened at swimming at the beach, sir. He can't come and tell me what's happening to him. And therefore, as a society, we can't be hiding up things, Mr. Speaker. We can't be hiding up things. So if we know that there are people out there interfering with children, sir, we got to deal with it. We have to deal with it. And therefore, whether it is a registry or whatever you want to call it, sir, we know who the people are. And they say we, meaning Bajans, know who interfering with children in this country. And if Bajans know who interfering with children in this country, then it cannot be a discussion about the government wanting to take away children from parents. It is the state, us, sir, taking responsibility as a country for saying that this cannot happen, it will not happen, and that's why I said, sir, that within our families, we must have these conversations straight. You know, you young people talk about real talk and straight talk, sir. This is the straight talk, because you cannot, sir, condone big men and or big women taking advantage of children in a sexual way. It is wrong, sir. No matter how you look at it, sir, it is wrong. Now, I raised my son in the context, sir, that I know that in your professional capacity, sir, you do a very good job. And I say to the director of the board that if I ever find out that anybody interferes with my son, there's a process, and my honourable member here has outlined clearly what that process will be. But, sir, my wife has your number, sir. And I say that unapologetically because it is important, sir. It's important that we understand. Sorry? My wife has your number, sir. And I say this with the greatest respect to those of you who, after 30, 40 years dealing with these issues, may feel sometimes as if the system is not moving fast enough, through you, sir, through you to them. May not be moving fast enough to help you protect the children of this country. And as a parent, sir, it can't be right. And people feel hopeless. Hopeless when they report and things aren't happening fast enough. And it's not anybody's fault here, but the system, our system, us, sir, we ain't moving fast enough to be able to address these matters. And therefore, as families, young girls, young boys these days must be protected, sir. Children are not economic assets to be taken advantage of, sir. And therefore, big hardback men in this country, sir, big hardback men should not be taking advantage of children. It is nasty, sir, it is wrong. And, sir, I ain't drinking, I ain't lying with anybody, sir, that I even know or feel, sir, that they're interfering with children. And each of us have to take these individual steps, sir, to bring people to account. Because you cannot, sir, you cannot. It is not right. We're supposed to be a Christian society, sir. And therefore, if we're a Christian society, or you have religious persuasion, sir, you know that these things are wrong. And if these things are wrong within our families, we've got to deal with it. And therefore, I ask Barbadians to give the support to these officials here. So whether you're operating an organization, whether it is a school, sir, whether it's a sporting organization, whether it is a service club, whether it's a religious organization, sir, we must protect our children wherever they want to be in this country, sir. And we all know, sir, I say we all know, or hear, you just hear a little wizzy. And the little wizzy, sir, it's not healthy. We got to take action. Because anytime you're wizzy, it means somebody trying to hide up something. They want that to get out. And then you have this incestuous arrangements that are not focused on protecting the child, but on who you know. This is Uncle so-and-so, or Auntie this, or whoever it is that is of some type of reputation, has a reputation that people may wish to fear. But I'm saying to these honorable officers here, your duty, I know, is hard, but you got to fight through and be aggressive on behalf of the children of this country. And I know the honorable member indicated that sometimes the best thing is to ensure that you can get the family to stay together, sir. But if those circumstances in that family, sir, as you well know, if those circumstances are not conducive for a child to be able to have a healthy outcome, sir, then the state, these officers here, and others who we want to work with them, sir, this piece of legislation, this government is supporting you 100% in relation to being able to protect the lives of our children in this country, sir. And sir, it is not an easy thing to talk about. And I left here on Tuesday. You know, sir, there's a program on TV. It's called Another Beijing. When I went home on Tuesday evening, sir, the program was on, and usually comes on like 8 o'clock or so at night. And the particular subject matter that evening was more on spousal abuse, the lady was referring to. But she took action early, sir, because she indicated that, you know, she got married at 18. The abuse started. And by 20 or 21, she said she had enough, she was done with that. Too many people in this country, sir, don't take that type of action early enough to give themselves and their families a chance to be able to see a different path. And therefore, I want to encourage Barbadians, through those type programs and otherwise, we have to start having these conversations and be honest with ourselves, because that's the only way, Mr. Speaker, that we're going to see and be able to take the action that is necessary to ensure that the kind of numbers that we're talking about here, sir, where you have a situation where potentially one in every child in every classroom is suffering from some type of abuse in these statistics, I want to see them statistics. Them is the type of statistics, sir, that should be going down. Going down because, not because people hiding it up, but going down because people understand, sir, that whilst we are working to stabilize the economy and do all these things, sir, to be able to grow, that this is the what do you call that thing? You know, something rotten, like gangrene, sir. This is the gangrene. This is the gangrene that is eroding, I think, sir, the cancer, the virus, whatever you want to call it. This is that thing that we know, sir, that we can do better amongst ourselves. All of us know that we can do better amongst ourselves. And therefore, we cannot, in any circumstance, shy away from our responsibility as a government to not just pass the legislation, but to make whatever resources available to be able to help these officers here, through you, sir, to do what they set out to do as part of their mandate, because I know it can be easy when you get home at night after going through. I mean, you're looking at numbers, but I know you know the people, you seeing the side of Barbadians that a lot of us will not see. And it can be easy on you and your families to navigate that. For one case, far less, however many cases for 30 years. And therefore, the support that we need to ensure that not just you, but the families that you interact with, the government, will make the resources available as we try to do with everything that, against everything that we've been trying to focus on, sir. And therefore, we will continue to work with you as best as we can to be able to make these interventions from a systemic perspective. But unless Barbadian families do some serious self-introspection, Mr. Speaker, these numbers here, these numbers here will not be addressed adequately, because as much resources as we give these officers here, sir, if people don't find it in their heart to love the children that we bring into this world, sir, and to do right by them children, then I don't know where Barbados will be. And I say so conscious that these are just reported cases and not the full set of cases as perhaps. And that's the unfortunate part about this conversation too. Because everybody knows that this is all. Everybody knows that this is all. And that is the sad part of all of this, Mr. Speaker. And you certainly, through you, sir, to the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, the government has continued to provide resources as they become available. We will continue to do that support, sir. And therefore, I unreservedly support this bill, because this is at the heart as to who we are as Bajans. And I commend the work of the officers here this morning. I commend the work of the Honourable Minister and his team. And I hope that Barbadians heed the message, sir, and that we can see substantively a reduction in these types of incidents, and that we start to treat our young children and our adults on the other side in relation to the elderly, because that's the other side of the spectrum, sir, that we're able to treat every single child, sir, as if that child is a national asset, sir, to be treasured in order to make sure that they can live a healthy and a wholesome life, and not to be impacted, sir, by the negativity of all of the things that have afflicted them as reported here. And with those very few words, sir, I'm obliged to you, and I want to thank the officers for their good work. Thank you.
Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to lend my voice and support to what I consider a very important report on both child protection and child justice in this country. I want to start by echoing the sentiments of all of my colleagues, and certainly to congratulate the Honourable Minister and his entire team for the hard work that has gone into the framing of the legislation, and certainly building on many, many years of a vision to be able to not only care for, but also to protect the children of this country. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the importance of care and protection of our children must be viewed as a wider protection of our society. And I say that, sir, because as not only a former Minister of Education, but also as a representative of a very densely populated constituency, one who, and I will say it again, who has one of the largest housing areas in the country, I see things through perhaps a different lens than most, Mr. Speaker. I see that, and I have a funeral this evening to attend of another young man who has lost his life as a result of gun violence. It does not give me any great pleasure to have to even say that, sir. But as I opened, I thought that long and hard about it, and I recognize that the truth of the matter is that what we are doing here today in terms of care and protection is indeed allowing us to be able to care and protect our society overall. Because many of the symptoms that are seen when children are very, very young are often as a result of children who have been abused, as a result of children who have been neglected, as a result of broken households, generational poverty and intergenerational poverty. Children who nobody can pull them back because the person who is parenting themselves have not had the opportunity to be pulled back or to be guided in their ability to learn how to parent and to look after another human being, sir, or other human beings that they have responsibility for. This Barbados Labour Party administration, from as early as, I believe, the 1980s, recognized the importance of not only the establishment of the Child Care Board, but it also recognized the importance of what we are here today to do. And I took the opportunity, sir, because you cannot know from where you are going if you don't know from whence you came. You cannot understand the significance and the importance of legislation of this nature and the report that we are discussing over the course of these next few days if we do not understand the journey that it has taken to get us here, because this didn't come overnight. Many people will want people to believe that this is rush legislation, but the truth of the matter, when I go back to the Barbados Labour Party manifesto of 1986, sir, it speaks to a section on children. And in that section, it mentions that all efforts will be made to continue the work done by the Child Care Board in the area of child abuse. That comprehensive legislation will be introduced to protect the rights of the child and to protect children from pornographic and other immoral and corrupt activities, and from illegal drugs and other abuses. It goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, that consideration will also be given to mandatory reporting of cases of child abuse by medical and educational authorities. Mr. Speaker, sir, that is some 38 years ago that it was authored by persons who perhaps are long gone, who have served this country well, but I believe who, like many of us in this chamber, understand that the care and the protection of our children is in fact a wider protection of our entire society. If we fail our children, we are failing our society. Sir, I remember as Minister of Education holding some licks because I stood in this place after an incident where a child who has special needs was, I would have to say, abused. There were some concerns regarding some force that was applied to the child, sir. And I indicated then, and I will say no, because without fear of any contradiction, I will believe this till the day I die. That as a people who have come out of a system where we have been beaten and corporal punishment has been used to discipline and to place us in submission, that as a people who have been educated, when we come to a point where we recognize that there are various children on the spectrum, and the honorable member who last spoke knows this firsthand, that you have a number of children who cannot represent themselves correctly, whose behaviors, because of where they are on the spectrum, are deemed to be not normal. And as a consequence, what to some may seem as though it is a raised voice to say to a child, you should not do something, to those children, they hear a louder voice than has been echoed by the person who is trying to discipline them, sir. There are some who are high-functioning autistic. There are some who are low-functioning autistic. And with the information that we have come to understand and appreciate as an educated people, it stands to reason that we must be measured on this thing called corporal punishment. Because in the beating of our children, whether in the schools or whether in the home, because a lot of times we say spare the rod and spoil the child, but I went to university, I've been educated, and I understand that if you beat certain children, sir, you can damage and you can scar those children for life. And what is reasonable to one person is not reasonable in terms of force to another person. And therefore, my position will continue to remain. And sir, I speak from a position, I raised a child who was high-functioning autistic with Asperger's syndrome. And I speak firsthand that the laying of a hand, the laying of threats, of discipline towards a child like that can potentially do much more damage than it can in terms of being able to guide the child as to how to recognize right from wrong. And therefore, while I have been in that position to be able to recognize it, I am mindful that there are children out there whose parents believe that to spare the rod, that you spoiled the child. But if I were to believe that, sir, I would believe that all of the people who are now in Dodds prison should have been the beneficiaries of the rod and therefore should not have found themselves in prison. And I will leave that there, sir, for those who have ears and who have thinking minds to reflect on that. Because while this legislation and this report speaks to the issues of the day in terms of care and protection, and it's taken 38 years for us to get to this point, sir, with these reforms, the truth of the matter is that Barbadian society must reflect on this issue of corporal punishment, and in many cases, the damage that it has done to other generations, but also the continued damage that sometimes this does to our present generation as well. A child that believes that it is okay to hit you will often go on to believe that it is okay to hit others. And no amount of positive behavior management programs, no amount of anti-violence campaigns can erase from children the belief that they must be beaten to a pulp or that they must be inflicted with harm and bruises to be able to be disciplined. I believe that sometimes it is a better way to talk to children. And not all children can be talked to, but that's why you have professionals who do what they do. But they are not all children who can be. And we must be mindful that with the information that as a society we have gathered in relation to the type of children that we have and the issues children have, whether mental health or otherwise, a broad brush approach to corporal punishment may not be the singular way to be able to raise this nation's children. Sir, this legislation, this report, as I said, dates back to a philosophical underpinning of the Barbados Labour Party, having not only established the Child Care Board at the time back in 1983, but also an institution that understands that to preserve and to care for our children and to protect our children also requires of us to protect the family. And there are a number of pieces of legislation, a number of initiatives that this Barbados Labour Party would have implemented over the years, whether it was looking at the issue of poverty alleviation. We are the first administration to dedicate an entire ministry to social transformation. We are the party that understood that you cannot transform a society if you do not look at the society's ills, that you must look at the issues of poverty, because poverty has a way, especially when it is intergenerational, of preventing people from becoming of their best, of making little children not be able to participate in activities, especially extracurricular activities, because families are fighting to be able to put food on the table. And parents are making decisions as to which child benefits from certain activities after school, sir. We understand that while we bring care and protection legislation, that we also have a responsibility to ensure that where we see that parenting is going off track, that we have to ensure that we place within the school system the additional social workers, the additional guidance counselors, sir. And I think you would recall that we also introduced safety officers because we had a series, a spate of incidences within our educational system where we saw a proliferation of a number of incidences of violence that was taking place in our society. This Barbados Labour Party administration can be credited for putting the most resources within the educational system over the last few decades than any other administration, Mr. Speaker. And while discussions are ongoing regarding the amalgamation of social services, because this is very critical, these are things, as I said, we talked about from 1986, that are now 38 years later coming to fruition. But the reality is that as we put these resources within the system, we even recognize that some of the households are still so broken that there are additional resources that are needed. That while you put those persons in the institutions, you have to rationalize the social services sector. because it is the only way that you can modernize social services to make them more responsive to the needs of a society, sir. So there's no point throwing people into a system if at the end of the day you're not going to take a look at the institution through which most of our young people and their parents will have to interact, to be able to look at how do you amalgamate the social services, how do you strengthen all of these students who are coming from the University of the West Indies with social work degrees. How do we incorporate them into our society and into our institutions to ensure that they are able to deliver better services and care and protection for our children? Because this legislation is actually the model that will now allow us to be able to deal with a number of the issues that are red flagged on a daily basis within our educational institutions. Because you may not pick it up in the household, but many times our teachers or educators are the ones on a daily basis interfacing with our children. And they are often the first responders in terms of identifying a number of the issues that our children are experiencing. The fact that this administration has also saw it fit to move in the direction of decentralizing the support services into communities is to be commended, Mr. Speaker. Because we all know the issues of people having to be challenged in terms of their financial circumstances, having to go down to the welfare department, having to go to seek the services for counseling and stuff of their children, the challenges that are placed on them to be, and the burden that is placed on them to do so. And we understand that it is our responsibility not only to increase the support personnel, but to ensure that when we identify the problems within the schools, or we identify the problems within the households, we are equally able to treat to the root cause of the problem within a community, sir. When I was Minister of Education, one of the first things that I did, and I believe the model is still in the ministry to this day, is there was a recognition that we had a number of support services and agencies helping to support all of the guidance counselors and the school officers within the system. But we also knew that there were a number of entities privately providing services of counseling and support to families. And I felt then, sir, and I continue to believe that the system alone cannot do it all, that there are entities that needed to be regulated by the Ministry of Education that could provide that support to the support services, the student support services within the Ministry of Education. And what we did was we identified those persons that met a particular criteria, sir. We ensured that those persons were able to deliver the services that were necessary to the children. We expanded where it was necessary to other schools where we had issues. And we were able then to complement not only what the services of the Child Care Board can provide, but also what the student support services in the Ministry of Education can provide to our children. It is a model that this legislation now enshrines and recognizes as a model that will allow us to accelerate the needs of our society, the needs of our children as it relates to care and protection, sir. The principle of early intervention, which is enshrined in the legislation, is a wider mindset, it is a wider vision, sir, of being able to diagnose children from early with various illnesses, of challenges with their sight. And I think the Honourable Member for St. Thomas knows this well, and the Honourable Prime Minister, that when they were in the Ministry of Education, the Barbados Labour Party administration was at the forefront of ensuring that there was early diagnostic testing for children. We did not get here, Mr. Speaker, overnight. We have gotten to this point of this transformational legislation because we came to office and we recognized that the previous administration had decimated a lot of the work, a lot of the footwork that had been done by the Barbados Labour Party. And we saw children who came through a system that were not being properly tested, were not being properly assessed before they came to do the common entrance exam. I came across a system, you know, people talk about the 11 plus, but I will say time and time again that the failure of the last administration to be able to ensure that things like a criterion reference test did not become a test, but it became an assessment of children to help us to diagnose the challenges of children was a failure on that administration, sir. Thankfully, we have a government that understands and appreciates that we have to get back to first principles. So whether it is intervention in relation to the social services or whether it is early intervention of our children, the principle remains the same, that unless you get in early to diagnose, to assess, to root out the problems, to counsel and to support, you end up with a broken society, which then wreaks havoc on each and every one of us. Because the reality is that this legislation, many of us will not touch this legislation in our lifetime. For the ones who have children, y'all ain't ever gonna see a reason to have to use this, Mr. Speaker. I don't have any children. I am the protector of the nation's children. All the ones who call me auntie. But at the end of the day, I believe that we have gotten to a point now where with this legislation, we have done what was to be done for decades, and it gives certainly to the agencies, I believe, some clarity as to who is responsible for what. Because one of the other things as Minister of Education at the time was that there was often a shifting of responsibility when it came to who was responsible. If something happened within the school, was it that the school had to report the incident to the police? Was it that they had to go to the child care board? At what point was the multidisciplinary committee going to kick in? Despite having child abuse protocols, there are still at times incidences that I believe this legislation will now correct as to where the responsibility lies for taking action. And I think that this will close the gap on all of the hesitation that has existed as to whose responsibility it is. Because mandatory reporting for me, Mr. Speaker, is perhaps the most important thing that exists in this legislation, where a responsibility is now placed by law on a number of individuals to report incidences of abuse, whether that is the parent, whether that is a medical practitioner, a health practitioner, a dental practitioner, a mental health practitioner, whether it is an administrator of a hospital or a medical facility, whether that be a school principal, a teacher, or other teaching professional, whether that be a social worker or other social service professionals, sir, whether it be a law enforcement officer, and perhaps the one that is not normal, but shows that an administration and those who have helped to draft this legislation understand what is going on in our society today. It places a responsibility on an internet provider. It places a responsibility on a film technician, a computer technician, and a telecommunications technician, sir. And why? Because we have seen over and over. Just recently, I saw an image of a young lady, a minor child, performing oral sex on a hardback man in a video circulating. I am upset with the perpetrator, but I am more upset with the people who send out the video, who continue to perpetuate a wrong. And I pray and hope that the authorities have been able to bring that situation under in the rightful place. Because unless we as a society are able to call out these activities, denounce these activities and say that they are wrong, many of those who are in our society will continue to believe that it is okay to look at the young lady as she's developing and she's getting breast and bottom, that it is okay to touch her inappropriately as though she's a big hardback woman, sir. We believe that it is okay as a society not to say when a wrong has been committed to a child. And I want to talk about that, sir, because I believe that this is a deeper issue in our society where people do not want to bell the cat, where people do not want to tell on somebody, or as the young people say, nobody don't want to snitch, sir. Well, I want to say to this country that not snitching, not reporting, not telling the truth is costing our society the lives and of a future generation. Because whether it is the young man that I go to bury today, who people know are responsible for his death, but nobody don't want to say nothing.
They don't want to say nothing because they don't study. It could be their children. It could be their grandparent. It could be them. They are so caught up on not snitching. They are so caught up on that stitch. You get stitches for snitching. That's what the music tells us, sir, in case the adults don't realize what is going on. And unless we have a serious conversation with our people, our parents, or our leaders within communities or churches, that you must call a spade and tell people when they are right and you must tell people when they are wrong, sir, we are going to continue to preside over the decay of our society. I tell my constituents straight, do not call me. If you know that your child is involved in activities and you are encouraging it, I have taken a hardline position on this, sir, because I have buried more young men than any of my colleagues in this country. I have gone to more funerals and laid to rest young men who a system would have known that these young people were creating problems over the years, sir, that the families were struggling, that the children were getting interfered with. And nobody has done nothing, or if they did something, it was not enough, sir. I am tired saying sorry to mothers, to grandmothers who bawling their eyes out, sir, because we seem to believe that care and protection is no longer our collective responsibility. That's the police problem. Let the police deal with that. And if the police don't have enough intelligence, well, we are not here to give them any information, sir. But I want to say, as a representative, as a minister, as a human being, as a Barbadian that cares, that those who have information need to share that information with the authorities. Because today, for one family, the next day it could be you. And we need to go back to first principles of being our brother's keeper, sir. That's what this legislation is about, care and protection. We won't collide with this in our lifetime for our children and in some cases our families. But our constituents, in many cases, are the ones who will have to interface with this legislation, because we all know somebody who has challenges in terms of whether it's the financial support or the financial abuse towards their children. We know somebody whose child is being touched inappropriately. We know that in densely populated communities where you got 15 people in a household, and of that 15, you have about 10 children, that at some point when the mattress is on the floor and somebody who is the adult is sleeping, there may be some young man who is inappropriately, and related, who is inappropriately touching a little girl on her private parts, sir. That is the reality of what is happening in our society. And I will forever say, sir, that one of the things that we as a government, we have also committed to is housing. Because I believe that housing has a large part to play in changing people's behaviors. When you have overcrowded houses, not only does it create the social problems in terms of whether you put down groceries and if the groceries belong to somebody else in the house and you can't touch them, but it creates a lot of tension in a household where there's not a lot of space. And the sooner we can escalate our program and be able to make sure that we are able to ease the dense nature of communities, the better for us as a society. But it is not to say that government's responsibility to do this is the only responsibility that exists. Because communities need to get back to raising children, being able to tell children as well when they're going wrong. And this goes back to this issue of, again, you're turning the other cheek, you're looking the other way. We need to get back to first principles as a society, not only with the care and protection of our children, but understanding that this is going to have an impact on our wider society. And that no matter how many resources we deploy in relation to schools, no matter how many resources we provide to the social care agencies, if at the end of the day we are not equally improving the parenting courses, and ensuring that we are able to nip things in the bud early, we ain't really doing anything, sir. And I fear, sir, that, I want to hope that the resources that are necessary to respond when the problems are highlighted by this legislation can be responded to. That it is better to put the money into the social care agencies to root out a lot of these issues and into the same area of housing than it is, sir, to be able to have to put the money in the Office of the Attorney General to deal with criminal justice and intervention. We need to make some decisions as to where the priorities are, sir. It is not only about resources for defense and security after the fact, increasing armed forces, increasing the deployment of police, sir. That should be the last resort. What we need is to accelerate the resources into our social programs to make sure that entities that the Honourable Minister has responsibility for are able to be flexible enough to respond quickly to the interventions that are needed. Now, we have focused a lot on being able to preserve communities, preserve families, hence why we, as a party, were very focused on residential care programs, building out those programs as well as foster care. Again, with a mindset that we must get other people to help care for children and families who find themselves in a spot of trouble. And we need to get back to getting our society to realize that, because you've accumulated a certain wealth, it doesn't mean that you don't find a way to give back, that you don't take in a few children in foster care, or that you don't support the residential facilities to make sure that they are able to deliver better care services to our children and to their needs. The reality is, sir, that in many cases we want to be able to integrate children back into households, but that is not always possible when it comes to abuse. And again, I think that the minister at the appropriate time will obviously, and the government, wider government, will have to speak to the issue of how do we deal with those situations where there are children who cannot, for whatever reason, go back into a household. How do we deal with them? Because yes, we have residential facilities, but there are so many other issues that surround that household. How do you deal with the perpetrators? How do you deal with the rest of the siblings in the household who've been impacted as a result of the abuse of a child or two within the household? I had an incident recently, Mr. Speaker, and I shared this openly because these things trouble my soul, where we removed a young lady and her children from a household, placed her into a shelter, another accommodation, because the husband, who is the stepfather of the child, felt that it was okay to kiss this 14-year-old and then admit to the mother that he had kissed her. I won't say the other inappropriate things that he did, Mr. Speaker, and I won't even begin to imagine if there are other things that he did that we have not become aware of. But what worried me about that situation, Mr. Speaker, is that the mother so loved this gentleman that despite a recognition that what was done was wrong, still believes that there's a level of forgiveness that she can find in her heart for somebody who has touched her child inappropriately, looked on her girl child at 14 years old, and believed that he had some right to be able to take advantage of her. The fact that this mother, Mr. Speaker, has gone on to entertain the company of this gentleman in the new accommodation is also further troubling, because it sends a message to our children that it is okay to feel them up, it is okay to do things which are inappropriate to them as children, and that our adults will sit idly by and allow these things to happen. And I therefore want to take this opportunity to call on not only the ministry, but certainly the minister responsible for home affairs in terms of our communication, to ensure that we are able to promote the messages that are the positive messages, the messages that need to get out there to families, that these, and to mothers in particular, that these behaviors are unacceptable. Because this mother has a son as well. And I'm pretty sure that while he watches on what is happening, he is forming a belief that it is okay for him as well at some point to do a similar deed, and that there will be forgiveness. And unless as a society we continue to condemn these activities, that we have the support services able to move in and to make sure that there are charges brought, to make sure that action is taken, to counsel the individuals so that that behavior is not repeated, Mr. Speaker. My fear is that it will repeat itself again because it is a cycle. Because at 14 years old, this young lady has now been made to believe that while the gentleman, his stepfather, has had a slap on the wrist because he's been warned, and the mother said, well, don't bother to pursue anything, and she's been convinced not to pursue it, the reality is there's another little girl in the house who at some point is going to develop the bottom and the breast, and who at some point perhaps will catch his eye. And unless we are able to move quickly to deal with these types of interventions, we are not truly caring and protecting for our children in this country. And instead, we will end up presiding over another generation that believes that these things are okay. So, Mr. Speaker, I support wholeheartedly this legislation, this report that has been done. I want to say that this Barbados Labour Party is a great party. I say that unreservedly, Mr. Speaker, because I do not know of any other political institution that would entertain the views of people, a cross-section of people, whether they're people who wish to spout alternative facts or otherwise. This Barbados Labour Party entertains them, sir, because we believe everybody has an opinion, all ideas must contend, and we are not afraid to modify and to amend any piece of legislation or to take advice from people if we find ourselves not getting it right the first time around. The history of this parliament will show that this government has done more on record to ensure that there's full participation of our people in its affairs. Whether it has been the well of parliament being opened up so public officers directly can address matters that are relevant to the people of this country, whether it has been the institution of the Paris Speaks programs where people can come to meetings with their public officials, cuss me when they feel like, sir, tell me where it is they want to tell us, and we listen, we account to the people, sir, and we go back to the drawing board and we try to correct those things that are within our power to do so. We have consulted more than any other government. We have established committees in this parliament because we recognize that we have 30 seats. Because we still have 30 seats. I don't care what the Honourable Member for Christchurch South chooses to do, we still have 30 seats. Because we are still representing the people who put us here, if he chooses not to. But I say, Mr. Speaker, in all sincerity, that what we are doing here today is transformational. This report, the process to get us to this point is also transformational. We have met on things like the vending bill. We've met on the cybercrime bill. Despite all of the voices, the loud voices and the asides, we have met and we've tried to ensure that we do right by the people, that we don't rush legislation, or if there's an appearance of a rushing of legislation, that we are not too big to come back and to say, let us make the modification, sir. Sir, I sat and I listened to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, who has come to this place now with a recent discovery of things to be critical of, to present alternative facts on matters that have taken place over the course of the last 6 years, sir. I would like to move a motion today. I don't know if it is by way of a private member's bill, but what I saw displayed last night at the George Street auditorium upsets me, sir, because as a student of politics, when a general secretary is going to come out and say that there were intruders entering George Street, perpetrators, cutting locks, climbing over fences, changing locks, and then I'm listening attentively and I'm saying to myself, oh God, would they get now to George Street? But this is a serious thing. I'm ready to call the AG. I say, what we doing? And then I come to realize, I listened again attentively to the General Secretary and realized it was an inside job. Inner inside job, sir. I say this to make the moment light, but this is a serious issue. This is a very serious issue, a very serious juncture in our political history, sir. And I would like that we move a motion, not just for care and protection of our children, sir, but for the care and protection of the Democratic Labour Party as an institution. Because it is not right, it is not fair for the people who voted for the General Secretary or for the people who have supported the Democratic Labour Party to see the display that is taking place in George Street. All of the members who have spoken in this debate have spoken of substance, sir, have gone to the root core of what we experience daily in terms of our interaction in relation to the care and protection of children. We didn't come in here spewing things that are not true. We came to do the people's business, sir, and I think they need to get their house in order. If they don't want to bring the private members bill, if they don't want to move the motion to protect the institution of the Democratic Labour Party, in the same vein that this Barbados Labour Party administration is on record as protecting and preserving institutions and the rights of institutions and people in this country, then I feel that we owe it to the Democratic Labour Party to bring the motion for them, sir. They are setting a bad, and the Honourable Member is saying for St. Thomas behind me, they are setting a bad example for democracy. They are setting a bad example for our young people. We are talking about care and protection of our young people, but each of us in here are examples for our young people, sir. I remember being on the other side and being disgusted by the behavior of members on the other side at the time, the then government, as to how they would speak not only to each other, but speak to us across the floor. And I said to myself, but this is not the way that you lead by example, sir. And what is taking place at George Street, does it mean now that anybody could go and break in their house? That's the example being set. That it is okay to take the law into your own hands. There are procedures and processes for dealing with disgruntlement. Are we saying to households that it is okay to take the law into our own hands? I think not, Mr. Speaker. And as I have denounced the issues of abuse and called for other care and protection in relation to our children, I reiterate that the Democratic Labour Party, under whose ever leadership, needs a bush bath, they need a cleanse, they need to understand that we do in this country like to hear the varying opinions. But at the end of the day, they must be credible, sir. And right now, their credibility is unfortunately getting muddled because of a quest for power. They can speak on this side. They tell us all, they want to call everybody name and say that we are doing all kinds of things, sir. But the one thing we remain focused in this Barbados Labour Party government on is doing the business of the people, making life better, not just for Barbados Labour Party members, sir, but for all Barbadians of all walks of life. That is what our leadership has taught us. That is what our history has taught us from the Barbados Labour Party manifestos over the years, sir. That we have to do what we do based on a philosophy, and that we owe it to Barbadians to make life better for each and every single person. And so again, I commend the minister, his team. I know it is not an easy task to have to work in this environment, but I commend you for the work that you have done on the shoulders of the persons who you have climbed on to be able to do this work, which is clearly long in coming. I have all confidence that the Child Care Board is in good hands under the minister. The minister has brought so many pieces of legislation and is leading the forefront of the changes because of his also vested interest. He has come from a community, my own community, where he understands the importance of this type of legislation and the impact of getting our institutions in order, sir. He understands it. This is not a fly-by-night thing for the Barbados Labour Party. We have put people in place who understand what is necessary to effect the transformational change that is needed in this country, sir. And therefore, with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I am obliged.
Honourable Member for St. Lucie.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I just rise to give my unequivocal support to this fantastic and very necessary piece of legislation that has come back here today that we have been discussing over the past couple of days, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to go into all the stats, etc., because I want to be extremely short and give those persons who will want to make a contribution as well the opportunity to do so. But I want to commend the Honourable Member for St. Michael South and his team on bringing an excellent piece of legislation. I further want to commend this government for having the fortitude, Mr. Speaker, and the courage to bring this legislation here before this Honourable House. I have heard over the past few weeks coming out of the bosom of the leader of the opposition words like courage and all these things, Mr. Speaker, and spewing as well venom at this government for doing those things which this government firmly believes in, for going where no other administration has dared to go in the past, for pulling together three pieces of legislation under one umbrella, Mr. Speaker, sir, and protecting our children, the future of this country. Mr. Speaker, we have been accused of being irresponsible in some instances. We have been accused, Mr. Speaker, of not knowing what we're doing. Because a government brings legislation, and then that legislation is sent to a select committee, we are accused of not knowing what we are doing. In fact, we know what we are doing because we are giving opportunity to the public of Barbados when legislation comes before this House to make an input when it goes to the select committee, because people have the right and people have written to the chairman or chairperson of those committees. The same thing has happened, Mr. Speaker, sir, with the cybercrime bill, where persons have been, the general public have been given the opportunity to make an input. The government hasn't brought legislation, certainly this piece of legislation, and other pieces of legislation, Mr. Speaker, where it's come to Parliament and is rushed through Parliament and passed. Going to a committee simply gives the public the opportunity to make comments and to make an input and to say how they feel about the legislation, so that it gives government the opportunity to come back, taking what the public has had to say into consideration and make the necessary changes. This government has not been interested, and is not interested in putting on bolts and locks and cutting chain and all that kind of thing. This government is interested in doing the business of the people. And despite the criticism that we receive, we will not look back. We will not go back from our responsibility to this country. They have given us 30 seats for a reason. They know we have the courage, Mr. Speaker, to take and to do that which we have to do, even if it's unpopular at the time. That's why we want to commend this minister. Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 weeks, if I ever thought that this legislation was not necessary, I have had to change my mind. I didn't think so. I always believed in it. But it confirmed to me why legislation like this is necessary, Mr. Speaker, over the past 2 weeks in my constituency. A caring minister charged with this responsibility. When I contacted him and asked him to come with me to go and look at 2 situations, Mr. Speaker, the minister immediately responded, give me a time and date, being the next only 24 hours away. You know, they didn't give me a time and date 2 weeks down the road. 24 hours. And the minister came. Mr. Speaker, and what we saw or what we heard emphasizes that this legislation was absolutely important, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, Mr. Speaker. On the behalf of those families, I want to thank him from the bottom of my heart. This is what governance is about. This is what responding is about, Mr. Speaker. So, in my closing, I want to say that this legislation could not have come at a better time. I want to urge Barbadians not to listen, not to pay attention, and not to be swayed by a certain set of persons from a street named George, Mr. Speaker. By George. Not to be swayed. Because we know that the potential there is to mash up and not buy back. But I want to commend this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, to this House and to give my firm and unequivocal support to it, Mr. Speaker. I am obliged to you.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank you for the opportunity to be able to participate in another debate that will come, in my view, to be seminal, reflecting the transformative purpose of it. It is perhaps appropriate, sir, that you are in the chair, and the record should admit of the facts that you have spent most of your life working in this particular area, especially with the Child Care Board. And I can only imagine, sir, that were you not in the chair, the kind of speech that you would want to deliver in this honorable House today. I therefore, sir, commit myself to speaking not only on my own behalf, but if I may be so bold, sir, to speak on your behalf as well. We share common boundaries in our constituency. We work in common purpose there, and therefore I would like to believe that in this chamber, on this topic, you will give me the capacity, so to speak. Sir, I want to start by commending all who have spoken in this honorable debate. You know, this is a country that is interesting because we tend to focus on the negative. And we tend to take for granted the positives. And I want to say to my parliamentary colleagues that I watched every single speech. On Tuesday, I had dental surgery, yesterday again. So I was not here on Tuesday, but I watched every single speech, including the representative for Christchurch South. And I have been in this chamber, either the lower house or the upper house, for 33 years. And this ranks among one of the most positive and transformational debates that I have ever engaged in this regard. It is true that they say history and circumstances make people. And the circumstance which is making me admit of this recognition in this debate was perhaps reinforced this morning by the Deputy Prime Minister in bringing the 1986 manifesto to show you how long, sir, this country has been trotting the road to be able to turn the corner from a Victorian piece of legislation that has long become irrelevant to the circumstances of our children in this nation. And Mr. Speaker, this government, in spite of being in an IMF program, in spite of facing debt restructuring and all of the challenges that we face, determined that we would only be equal to the mandate given to us if we are prepared, Mr. Speaker, to treat transformation as a critical part of our mission. In last year's budget debate, not this last one, I made the point that we came in to face mission-critical issues, and when we thought we could turn the corner immediately from mission-critical to mission transformation, we had to bounce up mission survival. That does not mean that we will not return to mission-critical or mission survival, but last year we said normal service must resume. And in normal service resuming, sir, mission transformation has to be the order of the day. We cannot tell our people and our children that a piece of legislation passed under the shadow of Victorian times can continue to influence the behavior of a country that is capable of sitting in Barbados and having meetings with anybody from any part of the planet Earth on a telephone. And all that increase in technology has admitted, we know, is not just for good, but also for evil, because it is just a tool. And Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the transformation that Barbados must face is not just in the area of what we are doing here, but we understood, for example, that you cannot continue with criminal justice legislation, Mr. Speaker, in the other part of your life that is equally shaped by Victorian times, with a penal policy that is equally shaped by Victorian times. You will shortly see the Attorney General bring legislation to reform our criminal justice system after consultations last year. National consultations were had. With respect to other aspects of transformation, sir, within the labor framework, when those said you couldn't pass minimum wage legislation, period, far less in a pandemic, this government defied the odds. The labor clauses bill here. And I give this context, sir, Because the same minister as well, very shortly, will reform a 19th century welfare system into a 21st century family-based and family-focused system. And Mr. Speaker, that is a companion piece to this child protection and what we will soon discuss in the child justice legislation. The penal policy, 19th century, the concept of wandering and the concept of how we treat to people in a very colonial manner, almost akin to the offense of unlawful possession, which shifted the burden of proof on to the defendant in ways that should never happen, because you as a poor person would have to explain why you would have anything in your possession. Because the presumption is that you should have had nothing. And that piece of legislation came to literally act in a tyrannical way on the lives of too many of our people over the course of the last 150 years. So, Mr. Speaker, I start from here because we have to understand context. And the context against which this is happening is that what portended for a legislative framework, you've heard from everybody in here, was insufficient to meet the needs of a modern Barbados. To meet the needs, Mr. Speaker, of a Barbados where we know, and the numbers are here, on average 670, 667, 672, 657 cases we're dealing with children every year. Now, the good thing is that is probably, 2% or less than 2% of the overall population. But I think it was the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central who made the point that is just of the reported cases. And we know that there's many that are not being reported and that you will hear about when they're 35 years old, or 47 years old, or 23 years old. In other words, when they have already passed that vulnerable stage. And this government was very clear that the absence of an enabling and appropriate legislative framework is not something that should continue. We may not be able to stop every case because that's just the nature of life. But we must be able to ensure that the environment within which those cases can flourish must be obliterated. And the environment within which we can deal with people who are so bold as to do the unconscionable, that they should be held accountable. And Mr. Speaker, we've also evolved as a society to learn that it's not just physical abuse that damages children, that there are all types of abuse. And that we need, therefore, when a child who has no control over anything, they don't control what they eat, they don't control where they go, they don't control where they sleep, they don't control anything because they don't earn. They don't have the capacity mentally and socially in terms of maturation, depending on age either. And in those circumstances, sir, the state has a duty not to replace the parent. Not at all. Never. But to support the development of that child and to ensure that those who have an obligation to take care of that child protect that child in every possible way. Mr. Speaker, this is, without question, a fundamental precept of who we are and what we support. And I say, sir, I said it when the monument to the family that is outside of this honorable chamber was declared open in November, that the mischief makers who want to bring all kinds of stories and all kinds of agendas, don't confuse that with this government's program and philosophy. We have seen a number of attempts in the last few years. The Deputy Prime Minister told you earlier how much we've consulted. The member for St. George North told us how many people came and gave evidence to the committee. And I'm going to come to the end about the importance of the consultative processes that we've put in place as a parliament before I end. But the bottom line is, sir, that there were a number of allegations, and I want us to cast our mind back to them. Because, as I say, we sometimes are a society that looks at the negative and gives vent to it. And we need to be able to always remember and remind people and let people draw their own conclusions. Sir, from the time the Honourable Member for St. Philip West was accused of being responsible for a survey about children that was inappropriate, there has been a whole web painted to be able to protect the agenda of a few and project the agenda of a few rather than to deal with the facts of the situation. So we heard all kinds of things. And I'm pulling up the letter from the IDB again. Because the Inter-American Development Bank is not a fly-by-night institution. It is an institution that the last government, this government, many governments before, and many governments in the future will deal with, because it is the primary multilateral development bank in the hemisphere. It is the equivalent of the African Development Bank. It is the equivalent of the Asian Development Bank. They are regional development banks. Within our own sub-region, we have the Caribbean Development Bank. And that institution, from day one, told us that, and I want to read it again into the record of the House, because this madness must stop. And people must be allowed to make their own judgments when I finish showing you the tissue. The Inter-American Development Bank expresses regret that a survey administered by the bank to children in the Barbados secondary school system has offended many Barbadians. Of course it did, and justifiably so. The letter continues. The bank sincerely apologizes but stresses that no offense was intended. That the questions at the center of concern to which the Ministry of Education had objected prior to the administering of the survey, and which were inadvertently left in the paper, have been removed. The IDB recognizes its position as a development partner with the government of Barbados with a long and mutually respectful relationship, and assures Barbadians it would not deliberately engage in any practice that would harm that relationship. Mr. Speaker, the evidence is there. This is already a document of the House. And Mr. Speaker, member for Christchurch East wanted me to use the Latin phrase res ipsa loquitur. The facts speak for themselves. But in spite of that, the fake news and the fake allegations continue. But I didn't stop there, I'm going to come back to them. You then had the issue at Springer Memorial. And once again, that letter too was read into the records of this honorable chamber, where, as is custom, schools run drills from our time. And the school notified the ministry of the drill. But once again, the government is at the center of a confusion and controversy that was explained, had nothing at all to do with the ministry and the chief. All of this to try to attack the environment within which children are being raised. Then you had the allegations of gender neutral bathrooms in St. Philip. But even I wanted to know what was going on, because I hear it on radio like anybody else from the shadow minister from the Democratic Labour Party. Lo and behold, the principal speaks. Not true. Not a member of parliament spoke, the principal of the very same school refuted these allegations. Number 3. And then 2 weeks ago, up again, Professor Warrican had to come out, not a member of this parliament, university professor, to come out and say, what nonsense is this? This survey that we are talking about is not only not controversial, this was approved by the former Minister of Education, and I didn't mean Sandra Bradshaw. Don't know who that person is, of course. But the former member for Christ Church, East Central, one of the longest serving ministers of education. I have no problem with him. But Professor Warrican had to come out and place context. So when I then got to this point of understanding what was then surrounding this child protection bill and the controversy is now extending itself to the cyber crimes bill, I begin to see a common thread. And in every instance, that common thread has been based on a tissue of fake news, a platform, in fact, not a tissue, a platform of fake news. Now, I want to say that the day that a political institution gets so desperate that its only way to promote itself is to create fear and scaremongering among families and parents is the day that we have reached the depths of the worst aspect of our democracy. And they forget that perhaps the worst thing we can all do to children is to leave them in a household where their parents have no option as to how to raise them because they have no jobs and no economic opportunities and no fortunes. Or that the other worst thing that we can do is to deprive a child of the legitimate right to develop educationally and to remove from them the right to be able to go to university if that's what they want, or to go to any other post-secondary institution if that's what they want, because that is a natural pathway that we have said to our people ought to be available for them, and we have said it not for 1 year, 2 years, 1 decade, 2 decades. We have said it for our whole period of the post-universal adult franchise era, starting with the expansion of secondary education and then into tertiary education. So, Mr. Speaker, we have arrived here today, and the debate and the bill which the public of Barbados is hearing is so significantly different from that which it was told that it was about. How can a party who was responsible for signing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights so brilliantly and courageously so, in spite of not having all of the fiscal capacity, the resources to meet every element of the convention, the late Sir Lloyd Sandiford did that even though the economy was not in the greatest of shapes, because he understood as a teacher, I am sure, that fundamental to the future of any society must be the protection of its children. That is the very essence of who we are. And if you have economic deprivation, and this is the point that I want the others to understand, that is when you start to hear the stories about do this for a snack box, or do this for a haversack, school bag. These are the stories we get, not highfalutin gifts, you know. Basic things. And all of a sudden, a child is lured into an environment or into behavior that destroys the rest of their lives. I was just reflecting as we were talking just now and showed the Deputy Prime Minister studies that show that the majority of child molesters themselves have been molested. The cycle has to stop. And I support the member for St. John in his call for a register of those who have committed pedophilia, those who interfere with children. I understand that people have rights, but that register will take care of people who have been judged not by me or you, but by a court of law, as you know. And that person may have to be protected from themselves, but that is a matter for them. But we are going to protect the children from them. Mr. Speaker, I get this, because the attacks against this government, you can't attack how we're doing with the economy and where we've carried it. You can't attack how we're doing with the democracy and the consultation, don't mind all the talk, because as the Deputy Prime Minister said, from Parish Speaks to the committees before, and the reason why this debate is also historic is that in the history of this Parliament, it will come to be recognized that for the first time ever, this is the first product of a standing select committee introduced by this Parliament and this government in recognition, perhaps propelled by the result of the election, but it was something that we always felt. And I am going to say that had we had the Parliamentary Reform Commission 15 years ago, as was intended, when the same chairman, but the two deputy chairs, ironically, one's birthday was yesterday if you were living, the Honourable Branford Tate and the Honourable Sir Richard Haynes were to have been the two deputy chairs of that Parliamentary Reform Commission. But had that happened sooner, we might have had these committees in place sooner. But this government put this in place in order to ensure that ordinary people, more than even institutions, because the institutions were right, but ordinary people ought to be able to come up the stairs of Parliament or write to the officers of Parliament and say, these are my views and this is how I want it done. I don't know whether we fully appreciate the range of people who commented and institutions on this bill. The Anglican Diocese of Barbados, the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, the Barbados Association of Professional Social Workers, the Barbados Bar Association, the Barbados Christian Council, the Barbados Council for the Disabled. All of these were people who were invited to comment. The Barbados National Youth Parliament, the education officers, the Child Care Board, the Commissioner of Police, and we go right down the political parties. And then when it came forward, all of them were given the opportunity to think. The Roman Catholic Diocese, the Pentecostal Association, the Derek Smith School and Vocational Center, UNICEF Office of Barbados and the OECS. They were all invited. And when it came then to those who commented, the Barbados Bar Association, the Barbados Council for the Disabled, the Democratic Labour Party, and then Operation Safe Space, the Chief Probation Officer, and a number of individuals, some of whom were vocal in the propagation that this was a bill somehow that would open up gender fluidity into this country. I made the point that when I spoke on the monument out there, I had to say definitively and repeat it, that this government does not support any child having the right to determine its gender. That is not the role of a child. If you're an adult, you can do whatever you want. But this country and this Parliament will support its children and allow children to be children as they must be in order to allow them to be productive adults and citizens. And the protection will not be vacuous. The protection will not just be in terms of legislation, because legislation is one thing. But the ministry, in the reforms that they are bringing, are going to have the programs to reinforce parental education. And all of us agree that this is where it begins and ends. The child is only in a school for a limited period of time. The child is in a youth group for a limited period of time. The child is in a sporting group for a limited period of time. But at the end of the day, it is the home. And Mr. Speaker, as old as I am today, I make the point every time I have to speak in a certain type of family type event or whatever, that 90% of who I am today is because of how my parents raised me and the support that they gave me and the morals that they rooted me with. And I thank them for that. And when I tell people that that is not unique to any household, poor, rich, in between, that is what parents do for their children, or parent, or godparent, or grandparent, or aunt, or uncle, or cousin. That is the society we have that raises children. And there's some things that we need to think about and ponder on again. And when I tell people some of these things, they look at me as if, what? You went through that? If I went through it? You could not watch TV in my father's house and mother's house between Sunday night, 8 o'clock, and Friday afternoon, 4 p.m., unless it is the news. I learned to love the radio. Because that's the only thing that would keep you company when you're doing your homework, or if you teeth a call on your phone. It wasn't a cell phone or anything, and you couldn't really teeth a call on your phone because they use the phone too. And when you got call waiting, it was a big thing. You had to eat one meal together. And I'm saying these things because somewhere in the reach of my voice, people will understand that these are the things that made us me. Not the fact that I went to Queen's College. She knows that, Cynthia reminded me, because she knows the stories from when I served with her in the Ministry of Education. You wanted to go to the cinema on a Saturday afternoon? My father and mother ain't carrying you. First of all, you had to do, the chores, they didn't get them pocket money. Chores were just an essential component of your right to live. Go get there. But you had to go and catch the bus. And the most they would do, coming back late because you had a long hill to walk up sometimes, at night with no lights, the most they would condescend to do is to pick you up at the bottom of the hill. Saturday was the only day you might get away from having a meal together because Saturday was the day of freedom. My brother, he was the dogs. He had to feed all the dogs. My younger brother, 12 years older, younger than me, sorry, my sister and I had to do his milk, help bathe him, do all of the things in the household. You wanted to be able to get money, you had to go and do your own little businesses. In fact, the Labour Party members don't even know this. They're responsible for my never making roti in life again. At 15 years old, I got a job to do roti for a fair that the Labour Party was having. And after having to roll 250 roti skids, I swear I was never doing it again in life. I am sharing these stories, sir, as all of us must, because our youngsters must know that we didn't just suddenly wake up and get where we are, and that the moral rooting, the Sunday school, I tell the story all the time of when we were going to the cathedral for confirmation classes with the then Dean, Right Reverend Harold Critchlow. And one Saturday morning, my brother, mischievous as he was, the one who has now passed, Warren, asked the dean, but why do you have to give a contribution in church? What's the collection for? And Dean Critchlow said to him, well, it's not really about money, it's just to be able to reflect the generosity of spirit, and that you need to be able to have that developed as a culture in you. So it's not just about the money alone. The next morning we go into church. I see my brother walking with a little bag, but I had asked him that, didn't he? To my horror, when the collection plate comes around, he puts 25 Akis in the collection plate instead of the dollar that he had to put in at the time. But the point is, sir, that whatever happened, we had to go to Sunday school. I say these things, sir, because it is not just the big things like the passage of this legislation that will matter. This is a battle that all Barbadians must engage in. Now, we have recognized as a government that you can't assume that everybody has the same level of knowledge and the same opportunity to impart those skills. And that is why we are about, sir, and I know that the member for St. John has started the conversation, because equally, and we said it when we first formed Youth Affairs, that youth commissioners should not be people who are there for life, because youth commissioners were meant to be the eyes and ears and the hands and feet of government, which means they need to relate to their generation. And in recognition of that, the transformation that we want for the Ministry of Youth Affairs is to take many of those youth commissioners who have been trained and who have the exposure, and to turn them into parental and life coaches, to put them in communities so that they can work day to day with the young parents who, many of them, no longer living with their family, don't know what to do. They don't know if the child get in college. They don't know what to do when something happens. They don't know how to pull them back. They don't know that, look, homework matters. They're working, and the child may be what the old people would call a latchkey child, with the key for the house around them because nobody's at home when they get home. So that these parental and life coaches, particularly in communities that the member for St. Michael Southeast said are densely populated, must help to make a difference, because while we would have liked to believe that the community will do it naturally because it takes a village to raise a child, the government is no longer relying on serendipity, but will put systems in place to have these parental and life coaches as part and parcel of that critical ecosystem necessary to raise our children. Yesterday, I had the opportunity, and I felt so proud, to go into Bush Hall and to see members of that community come together to form a nonprofit entity called Building the Future, Building Our Future. And these are fellas, they're not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but they are people who love their community. And they've been able to do reasonably okay. They have jobs put down. They may not all have everything that they want, but they recognize that whatever they have to give back something. And two young athletes, one did well in knapsack and the other one in BSAC. The one in BSAC broke a record. 100 meters, I asked her if she's going to be a Shelley Ann Fraser Prize. She do so. Watch it and wash her off. I said, that's the spirit. That's the spirit. And that is why, sir, that I believe that the partnerships, this is all about partnerships. The partnership of the family, the partnership of the community, the partnership of the civil society organizations, the partnership of the church or the mosque or whatever religious grouping, the Rastafarian temples, the partnership of private sector, the partnership ultimately of us all. We have a responsibility at the institutional level, at the legislative level, and at the level of providing resources. But the people of this nation will determine how successful we are at raising our children to be the best that they can be. I want us to collectively internalize these numbers from the Child Care Board, sir, and to work to making sure that we can move from 650 reports a year down by providing the education and the coaching necessary to let people know how they can do better. And to recognize that if you are really having problems and you recognize that you're under stress, don't wait until it breaks, but reach out for help. Because that is what the government is trying to put there for you with respect to the institutions that we have. And Mr. Speaker, if we can do that as a nation and have the conversations that are consequential, that matter, recognize that every day is not going to be sunny for a mother or a father and that they need support. Recognize that the level of mental health issues in the country is no different from any other country, but we must put systems in place not only to be able to help that person who is going through it, but invariably, if they are an adult parent, the children who are likely to suffer as a result of the condition of the mother. Recognize that waiting for the worst to happen is not right. And that in everything, prevention is better or early intervention is better. Remember for St. Thomas, and I know what it is to stand up a whole night intervening with the family, bringing the children out, trying to place them in the... and I'm not talking about this time when I'm Prime Minister, I'm talking about before as a normal member of Parliament. These are the things that we contend with every day. And therefore, I do not understand how anybody who looks at the provisions of this bill can even begin to believe that a bill that seeks to do nothing more than amplify the rights of children, amplify the rights of parents, but protect and allow for early intervention, how this could be in any way inappropriate. Now, this notion that you get in here and say, I support the bill, but then you go and do and create the platform for all of this fake news, has to be called out. And we're going to call it out. And that is why I have pointed to those 4 interventions. Because if you cry wolf once, and you cry wolf twice, and you cry wolf 3 times, and you cry wolf 4 times, I'm sorry for you the 5th time. Because that's what's happening. And I want to say to those who genuinely believe, I'm told that there was a press conference going on now, I'm not sure which wing. I can't even say right or left because we don't know what their politics is. No, dissidents or non-dissidents. But I genuinely pray. Remember for St. Michael South, he said it. This country needs behavior from adults that sets examples in a mature way. And we need genuine engagement to make our democracy better. We need genuine criticism that is constructive to make our legislation better. That's why we go and listen to all these people in all these different environments. Because this government does not believe, and I've said it over and over, that it is either omnipotent nor omniscient. You will see that as Prime Minister, I have reduced the powers of a Prime Minister in this country. I no longer choose judges on my own. I don't choose a head of state on my own. All of these things we have put to public consultation. So institutions have a responsibility, particularly when we are dealing with vulnerable groups. And in this instance, there is no more vulnerable group than our children. I hope, sir, that when we come to the Child Justice Bill, I'm not anticipating that, and the Child Protection Bill, because this is one report, that we will see that what we are doing to course correct a framework that is more than a century old is absolutely critical if we are to stem the decay and to reduce the number of cases of those who regrettably are at the center of being victims before they have the ability to be an adult in this country. This is so fundamental. And I say to you, to the minister, that you have led well. I say to the Child Care Board that I understand the pressures that you are under, because nobody determines when the call is going to come to you. It don't come 8 to 4, Monday to Friday. I just told you about the member for St. Thomas and myself having to get out of bed and go and deal with a matter after midnight tonight. Others in here have told you similar stories in their debates, because this is who we are. But you in the Child Care Board in particular, when I say that there's need for a hospice in this country, it is because we say that at the individual level of parents and support, you need a break. But I don't know what to say to you at the Child Care Board. Because if at the individual level, they're only dealing with one family, and you dealing with this over and over and over and over and over and over, I believe that the country owes you a debt of gratitude for the 41 years. And Mr. Speaker, I look at you too, for the 41 years that you have been in existence. The fact that you have had so much success with so many people who have grown up in children's homes speaks volumes. Because if you were not having that level of success, trust me, in this country, Barbados, you would have heard about it a long time ago. And people would have tell you, don't mind Child Care Board, people's getting there. When the children come out, there's this, there's that, there's this, there's that. I tell people, Child Care Board, don't hear that. Alma Paris, when it existed, you never heard anybody for the 20 years that Alma Paris existed talking about the children's behavior or anything like that. So in this country, sometimes you don't have to look for what is said, you have to look for what is not said. Sometimes to be able to get the whole story. So I want to thank you on behalf of the government and the country, but to say to you that at this time, we now need to morph. And while this legislation speaks to a child protection authority, the ultimate authority, as the minister will say, I'm sure in his wrap-up, may well be the single-family entity that he's created and that he's been in deep conversation and consultation and preparation with his officers across both central government and the state-owned enterprises for the last 2 years. But before he, in the last 2 years, the member for St. Thomas, the person perhaps that I worked closest with in a ministry because she was my parasec for 7 years. The member for St. Thomas, with all of the empathy and care that she walks with in her bosom, is the mother of this legislation. And I want to salute her for the records of the House. If I had not called an election early, she might well have been the one delivering the debate today. But the bottom line is that as I thank the persons in here, I want to thank the many tens of thousands of Barbadians who still ensure that as much as we want these numbers from 650 to come down, if we did not have a culture of taking care of each other in our communities, these numbers would be far more. And for those who therefore are unsung, for those who we can think of a certain lady who had 10 or 12 children. I can't remember if it was 10 or 12, I think it was 12. You know what I mean? And different members of the family and the community took the children. Because that's the Barbados that we have. In many instances, you talk to people and they say, well, it's my godmother who raised me. And therefore, the call this morning by the Deputy Prime Minister for more people to become active, either formally or informally, in fostering and raising our children is critical. The call that the minister made for adopt a family is equally critical, because some people may not be able to bring a child into the house for all kinds of reasons. Their schedule or the complexity of the arrangements in the house, but they can support. And I say to them, don't just give money. I prefer you, and the minister knows this. Twin a person with a family rather than just simply money, because it develops the relationship. So you go there and you see the little boy kicking a football and realize he ain't got no football boot. And you say, wait, my mother coming in from New York next week, I can get her to bring in a pair for you. Or you see somebody needing something and all of a sudden, normally human beings respond to wanting to fix or to help. Most people. And it is that kind of relationship that we want the ministry to arrange, but with the condition, of course, that you have to check and make sure that the people are not going to act inappropriately. And that is why I support a register also for pedophilia. So my final point, sir, is this. Legislation can set the framework. Legislation can point the way. But the success of the legislation will be in the change of culture. And the change of culture will come not because government or opposition wants it, but because ordinary Barbadians accept that this is their mission, to be able to take the responsibility of raising our children as the most serious responsibility that we have, to ask for assistance where they can't do it on their own, and to help others where they have the capacity to offer help to others. Yesterday I spoke at the Trade Winds exercise about the importance of investing in our young people, mature behavior, and responsibility through exposure. Children like risk. Children like to play that they're adults. From young, they like to dress up and pretend to be an adult. From high heel shoes, they like to pretend that they're cooking in the kitchen. They like to play family. They like to do all kinds of things. Then when they become teenagers, they like to do the things that adults like to do. And if we don't expose them and talk them through, talk with, not to. Remember the preposition. Talk with them and talk them through the dangers, just as you would show them how to light a match. You show them how to light a match. You show them how to tell time. Well, teach them how to say no. How to say no when somebody is touching them inappropriately. How to say no when somebody is seeking to manipulate them for an apparent immediate benefit of a snack box or a dress or a ticket to a show, only to lure them in to a sense of comfort. Teach them to say no, even in established relationships as they get into boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. Teach them how to say no. And that no does not mean that you're any less of a person. I want the public service announcements, Minister, through you, Mr. Speaker, and the member for Christchurch East, that remind our children and our parents. I've asked for them. I'm going to demand it from the floor of the House now. I want the public service announcements that reinforce the basic precepts of good parenting, the basic precepts of how to develop as a teenager. And instead of us sharing all of the salacious and all other kinds of things. Let us share some things that you don't know who it is going to make an impact on. You don't know which family it's going to make a difference on. The government, therefore, stands in the breach to provide the education to that family or that child who did not have it. And once they can get it, they say, you know, that's true, you know, there's a better way. I ain't got to beat somebody to get them to do something. In fact, it makes sense for me to talk it through. Because if I talk it through and they understand the internal logic, then they ain't going to do it again. But if I just beat, what happens? So, Mr. Speaker, I want to, on your behalf and my behalf, commend the minister and his team at the ministry, the Child Care Board, as I said. I want to thank the honourable members of this chamber who have spoken. I want to thank all citizens and institutions who took the time to participate in this new deepening of our democracy. And we can see from both in the US and the UK, democracy is not something that you can take for granted. It requires work each and every day, no different from a house. If you don't maintain the house, what happens? It starts to fall apart. You don't maintain the democracy by strengthening it through consultation and improvement, it falls apart. There may well be things in every piece of legislation that we have continuously to review. This is not an exam at a secondary school, and perhaps one of the reasons why we need education transformation more than anything else in this country is that we have inherited a colonial mentality that celebrates this brightness above humanity. It has to stop. It has to stop. And part of the reason why the Democratic Labour Party is where it is today is that it refused to accept that children from newer secondary schools could lead it. I make bold to say so. And they should fix those things as a matter of urgency. I ain't gonna say a word about the locks. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you, and I look forward to our being able to see this legislation change the culture that will, or not only change, reinforce the changes in culture that are necessary to bring that number of 650 odd reports a year down and down and down to zero as much as possible. Call me an idealist, but I learned that if you shoot for the stars and you land on the clouds, we have done far better than if we remained on the ground. I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I feel very privileged, sir, to be able to stand alongside the honourable member for St. Michael South. We stand alongside each other in a few contexts, including as neighbors in the wonderful community of Britons Hill. But I feel privileged to stand alongside him, sir, and to associate myself with this groundbreaking transformation that we are in the midst of. I also want to associate myself, sir, with those who have spoken before me, who largely have been able to demonstrate in their various experiences, in their various areas of work, from the perspectives from which they come, why legislation such as this, in circumstances where some of the relevant pieces of legislation take us back to 1918, the year of the Young Persons Protection Act, and take us back even further than that, to 1904, the Prevention of Cruelty to Children Act, which, sir, even in its nomenclature, suggests that you're only trying to stop something really bad from happening but you're not really trying to embrace the fullness of who a child is. You are trying to prevent the absolute worst thing, cruelty. And the positive association of this legislation to which this report refers, protection. It is a far gentler principle. It is not just the absence of, and sir, you'll know that this Barbados Labour Party administration has taken that positive orientation in our work and in our approach, not just with respect to this legislation and this area of work, but sir, with respect to the Ministry of Health and Wellness. We show an understanding that health is not just about preventing illness, treating illness, but health really is about being able to encourage wellness and well-being among the people whom we serve. So similarly, we are not simply here to prevent cruelty. I mean, the notion that that is the only burden or the only mandate that we have to prevent cruelty against children, against arguably the most vulnerable among us. Our mandate or burden collectively is protection, but not only protection. This legislation goes far beyond that, to look at issues of voice and agency. These are things, sir, that in my day, what? Voice? Agency? You are a child, take your place. But what has that done to us? It has created an environment where children become adults who are afraid. Because we have cultivated spaces, homes, schools. Historically, we have cultivated spaces where children are not encouraged to create or to imagine. What are you imagining for? Study your school books. Take your place as a child. And sir, I really encourage Barbadians. I really encourage us all to be able to appreciate and understand the enhanced, the broadened space and rights, and also responsibilities allowed for children who are people. You know, we say with respect to equality principles and equity principles, and I'll use it with respect to women. There are many people who are afraid of the word feminism, sir, because somebody once told me that it sounds like a cult. And it is unfortunate that it has come to take on that association from people who have a fear of what it really means. And what it really means, feminism, gender equality. And I quote someone who came before me when I say, it is the radical notion that women and men are equally human. The radical notion. And so this legislation enhances and expands and presents the radical notion that children are human. They are not our property. We are the stewards of their evolution and their growth and their well-being. We are the stewards. They don't belong to us. And they are entitled to the same protection by the state as humans, to which any of us is entitled. And so I feel, sir, privileged, and I feel proud of my neighbor from St. Michael South and this government and the institutions that have brought us to this place, because when I consider the people who have worked on this for so long, I know that this comes from a place of seeing where we were, of themselves struggling within a context where the power that you had to protect children was so limited. And now this legislation brings us to a place where the state and the institutions of the state are truly empowered to be able to discharge their duty. And through you, sir, I thank the minister and the officers who have worked so diligently on being able to get us to this point. Sir, the Honourable Prime Minister, the member for St. Michael Northeast, spoke before me, and she regaled us with stories of roti and other things. But in doing so, she presented to us, in talking about the expectations of children within her own family and family structure, she really gave us an idea of some of the norms and structure of a family wherein there is discipline, and reminded us of the fact that it is possible to have discipline without having to use physical punishment. I feel that for some of us, that is also a bit of a radical notion. And I get a little concerned, and this is a very common Caribbean response, to say there's a difference between discipline and abuse. And people use it to defend striking other people. I say other people because children are other people. People use it to defend striking other people. And they say, well, they hear of a case of cruelty, the same cruelty that they were talking about in 1904. They hear of a case of extreme cruelty to a child. And they say, they distance themselves from it and say, oh, well, I hit my children, but I would never do that, because that is abuse. What I do is discipline. And the challenge with that is that that creates a sense of subjectiveness, wherein somebody must decide which part of it is discipline and which part of it is abuse. And so I think that to the extent that those charged with the care of children in our country have themselves realized in their own institutions that they need not apply they need not apply what I would call abusiveness. They need not hit children in order to be able to impart structure and discipline. To the extent that those who are charged with the care of our children as state institutions, in child care board institutions, that is not done. It sends the signal to the rest of us that no one should do it. And I stand ready to support our evolution collectively towards that place. Because unless we are able to have that common conversation, we are always going to be challenged with this struggle of determining when is the right time and when is the right place. Luckily, this legislation helps us determine that far more clearly. When is the time to intervene? This legislation sets out with clarity at Section 5. What are the circumstances? And it's not just to be able to say to the child care board or child care institutions of the state for them to know, but it's also for us to know. I want us to understand the extent to which legislation in a society signals what is the expectation of our own behavior. And I say that to say, don't wait to be prosecuted. Don't wait for the state to take action. Let this legislation stand as a standard for the expectation of what we will absolutely not tolerate in the care and protection of our children. And so, clauses 32 to 50, sir, as the honourable member who's leading this bill has pointed out to us, presents us with a far wider range of tools than we previously had for the state to be able to intervene. And I say a wider range of tools because it does not mean that a particular action that threatens a child will immediately lead to the most extreme of interventions. It is clear to me from this legislation that the state, that the institutions for childcare in this country want to maintain the structure of the family. Ultimately, that is what this is meant to do. It is meant to be able to hold the hands of parents and caregivers to say, look, you are going in a direction that is harming this child. Allow us to help you change direction in the interest of the child. That is what this legislation does, and that is what all the tools that are available across the systems of government allow us to do. And so it is mostly built around working with parents. And it also sets out for us clearly the various orders of the court that are needed or that would be sought in cases, extreme cases where removal of a child is needed. Sir, some years ago, before I came to political service, I regrettably observed some behavior that caused me to reach out to one of our institutions responsible for protection of children. And at that time, many years ago, their hands were tied, quite frankly, because the cases for intervention were then so narrow that as I sat there looking through the window at this thing that was happening, it had happened yesterday and the day before and the day before that, I was powerless, as were they, to be able to do anything about it. And so while we hear this anxiety about reporting, and others before me set out very clearly where mandatory reporting applies, but where we encourage other people in society to report and to give information where children are at risk, there was I wanting to have a role in protecting these children, but not being able so to do. But sir, I want to say that, you know, these reforms here are of necessity part of a broader set of reforms that confront us as a government today. The Honourable Member for St. Michael South and I and some others were meeting with the Inter-American Development Bank recently to consider the areas of work in which they support us. And the IDB said to us, well, we have 17 reforms that we are undertaking. And we said to them, well, congratulations, because we probably have 700. We are called on to reverse and overturn and modernize post-colonial and in some cases even colonial standards for how we live our lives in 2024. And we are doing it all at once. But I say that to say that this reform that is before us, this transformation, historical transformation that is before us, of necessity coexists and must coexist with the overall family law reform. It must. Because we are still grappling, and I know the Office of the Attorney General and colleagues have this front of mind even as they execute other reforms, but we still have a system wherein decisions that relate to family matters, divorce and custody of children and access to children, are still too long in coming. I know, sir, intimately so, of a case of a child whose father has not been able to have access to her in almost 10 years. To the extent that that 10 years spanned from the ages of 8 to 18, well then, that's a wrap. Any father-daughter relationship that may have been contemplated, the window has closed for that. And so in our conceptualization of child protection, we also have to balance protection of children from physical harm with being able to enable an environment in which children can live their best lives with access to the people who love them and care for them. And so I know that another part of this reform that does not fall to the honourable member who's leading this debate, but falls to us, must be to look at the extent to which the judicial system allows children fair experience of family life. Because while for us as adults, 10 years may not seem like a long time, a child who is 8 and in circumstances of no abuse, no criminal action, nothing that has caused him to be denied access, simply a delay in a decision from a court, she will never know what it is to be raised by her father. Sir, I want to come quickly to 2 other points that I think it is my duty to highlight with respect to this legislation. Sir, this week, well, for the last 2 weeks, we've had Trade Winds 2024 exercise on our shores, and I can't say enough times how proud we are as a government of Barbados to see the stellar leadership that the Barbados Defense Force has given to the Trade Winds exercise here in Barbados this year. It has been nothing short of outstanding. And as we closed the exercise yesterday, the Deputy Commanding Officer for the U.S. South Operations, say again? Shared with us some remarks. And in his framing, he said it casually because clearly this is the language that they use all the time and the language that the military uses all the time. But he said that the work that they do relates to protection in air, land, cyber, and sea. Rolled off his tongue. Air, land, cyber, and sea. Those are the domains in which we have to protect people. He didn't have to come and make an argument that cyber is relevant. He did not have to come and make an argument that cyber protection, the domain of cyberspace, is relevant. It is taken for granted. And so similarly, this legislation aligns with the cybercrime bill to the extent that it realizes that children must also be protected in an online environment. It is why clauses 16 to 18 of the cybercrime bill go very much into these ideas and making sure that children are protected in this environment by looking at how we protect children from, how we protect us all from child pornography, child grooming, and online child sexual abuse. The reason we single out grooming as separate from pornography is that those who would offend in this way often start right there. A child wanders into an online environment, gaming, for example. I have a godson who is a gamer extraordinaire, has won all kinds of awards and big cash prizes and things, more money than me. Gaming. And in those spaces, you often find lurking adults who have no interest. They don't know what's Halo from, what's Fortnite from, what's any of the other games. They have no interest. They are looking for children of whom they can take advantage sexually and abuse in the worst way. And it often starts there. Because guess what? You can whisper to someone in an online environment and no one will see. When we were growing up, the whispering often took place behind an ackee tree or even in the same home or next door. But you can whisper to a minor online and nobody will ever know the difference. And furthermore, you just behind a handle and nobody knows who you are. I had occasion on Monday, sir, of this week to explain painstakingly, I took my time, to the Honourable Member for Christchurch South, who seemed a bit confused, that the culture of bullying, the culture of abuse that exists online is a singular culture. What do I mean by that? It doesn't matter if you're sitting in Guyana, if you're sitting in Jamaica, if you're sitting in Barbados, in Serbia, in Bulgaria. Those young people who are in that internet chat or on Twitter or in a gaming room, they're all in the same place. They are all in the same place. So legislation that makes reference to Broad Street or Georgetown or Kingstown, it doesn't make sense for us where we are today. Air, land, cyber, and sea. Those are our domains of concern. And to the extent that if I walked into your house and picked up your child and carried out offensive acts against your child, you would want to be protected. If I enter your home via a device, if I enter your child's consciousness via a device, it is perhaps more pernicious because nobody can see when I enter. And so the cybercrime legislation, alongside this legislation, is framed specifically to be able to protect children in this environment. Beyond that, and beyond the mandatory reporting that is reflected here, that also includes internet service providers and telecoms and others who will control this kind of information that from time to time the state will need to have access to. I also have to support the member for St. Michael South, in his work to be able to build out reporting systems across service providers, across care providers, across the police service, the hospital, the schools. And when I say systems, I mean technology. I mean making sure that we can, in a private and protected way, be able to transmit data across jurisdictions of the state that mean that we can more quickly have information on some of the threats that are facing children. Because if we stay in an analog environment to do it, filling out a form, putting it in an envelope, taking it, getting on a bus, carrying it across the road, or even if we are just sending it via email, the truth is that we need to have more integrated systems. This also relates to gender-based and intimate partner violence. We need more integrated systems to be able to protect people. Sir, finally, what I will say in this regard is that the Honourable Member for St. Michael North East, the Honourable Prime Minister who spoke before me, reinforced the point that what we are trying to do here in this legislation concerns us all. There is a problem with how we frame assault in our conversations. I see often in the media reference to a grown person having sex with a child. Having sex requires consent. A minor child cannot consent. If a person of majority engages in a sexual act with a minor child, that is rape. And I know that I will hear the lawyers try and put fine points on what law exists. I am not asking you, I am telling you. So your law might have to align with that. But the way that we frame sexual acts perpetrated against minor children has to change. It is not having sex with. And the little snickering that we do about minor boys who are initiated into sexual activity with grown women also has to be set aside. It is not a joke. It is not something to whisper about. It is not something to knock your buddy about and say, yeah, boy, he was 11 and he was 12 and he did doing big man things. He was a child. And it is a balancing act, perhaps, that we have to do. And I say all the time that we have a challenge in this Caribbean with understanding that we have to protect children while we allow them to grow as adults. I see it all the time with girl children. And as soon as a girl starts to grow up in her own house, she ain't put herself there. She is in her own house, committing the offense of starting to grow up into a woman. And suddenly, adult women in her life, be it her mother or aunts or somebody, start to take offense at the very fact that she's just starting to grow up. She forced rape, she becoming a woman. Let's understand that sexual development and expression, once we are able to give advice and guidance, is a natural part of development. But I feel as if in this Caribbean, we are not quite sure how to move from raising a child to raising an adult. You're raising an adult. At the end of the exercise, you will have an adult. And so this notion that you are too much woman, you are more woman than me, if you're more woman than me, come on, we need to change the narrative. We need to change the narrative in our homes, in our families, in our schools, in the media, in our judicial systems, to be able to understand what it looked like, what it means to protect children. Sir, I feel very optimistic about where this legislation takes us. And further to that, I also feel optimistic and heartened by the participation of the public in giving voice to not just their concerns, and I think that is an over-vocal, super-vocal minority, but I have had far more feedback from people who feel relieved that finally the state has what it needs to protect our young people. This notion that if something is sent to committee, it means that government ain't sure. Well, since men brought in democracy is a problem. I thought that this is what we wanted. The most consultative government I have ever seen in my life in the Western Hemisphere. And still we suggest that to be able to send legislation to committee means that we are second-guessing ourselves and we're not sure. No, this is what democracy looks like. And so, sir, I congratulate, and I don't often do that in this place, because I feel that we're not in the business of patting ourselves on the back. We're in the business of saying, quite frankly, what we're doing and what support we need from the country to do it. But I do take this opportunity on this occasion to congratulate the minister, who I know is at the same time transforming every area of social support within this ministry. And he's doing it with the help and the partnership of all of the leaders of these institutions, all of the staff of these institutions. And I think that in itself is a transformative place for this country to reach. where we are all participating in the transformation of our country away from a colonial understanding of freedom to a current and lived understanding of freedom. And with those words, so, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I now would like to move that this honourable chamber be suspended till 2:10 p.m. for lunch.
Question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 2:10 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 2:10 p.m.